He has repeatedly cast doubt on its safety, claiming it could cause neurological or autoimmune issues, and on Wednesday he told News Nation,
because the MMR vaccine contains a lot of aborted fetus debris and DNA particles.
By the way, just gotta say, that's misleading. The vaccine, like many others, uses decades-old sterile fetal cell lines derived from 2 elective abortions in the 1960s. So it's not like babies are getting tossed into a meat grinder and coming out the other end on a vaccine assembly line. But, whatever vaccines he does go after, you have experts fearing that the consequences, they're gonna be deadly, right? Because requiring placebo-controlled trials could delay public access to life-saving vaccines by months, especially for seasonal boosters. Because you see, there's this narrow window of time roughly between June, which is when the FDA directs companies on which strains to prepare for, and September, when the shots are supposed to start going into arms. And if Kennedy is going to require them to undergo multi-year trials, as he suggested may be necessary, then it's not even clear how something like a yearly booster would be feasible. And this is another big criticism of the placebo requirement that we've seen, is that it's just unethical, right? Because you'd have to deny the shot to everyone in the control group, which effectively exposes them to the real disease without any protection. So you have critics arguing that if you're reasonably certain that a vaccine is safe, then it's just unnecessary, especially for children who are vulnerable. But notably, on this topic, when a woman in Dr. Phil's audience asked RFK what advice he'd give to mothers of newborn babies considering a vaccination, he said,
"We live in a democracy, and part of the responsibility of being a parent is to do your own research."
Which, is not a shocking thing for RFK Jr. to say, but it is a wild thing to hear when RFK Jr. is the nation's top health regulator, the guy who's supposed to review the research so you don't have to. Which, is why you have the likes of Professor David Gorski, for example, the managing editor of Science-Based magazine, telling the Post, instead of just an anti-vaccine activist saying this stuff, now the federal government, HHS and FDA, is now saying this stuff. That matters. As well as Paul Offit, director of the Vaccine Education Center at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, adding, "You are watching the gradual dissolution of the vaccine infrastructure in this country. The goal is to make vaccines less available and less affordable." And so you have people who have that view saying, for RFK, delaying the rollout of the vaccines, it's not a downside of the placebo trials. It is precisely the point. Saying they're trying to hamstring the industry as much as possible, whether out of a misguided sincerity or a quest for political gain. And all of it is part of the reason we're starting to see things like reports saying that scientists find measles likely to become endemic in the US over the next 20 years. But then from that, to switch gears to kind of a throwaway story, PETA is beefing with MrBeast. And that because of all things, the 100 people versus 1 gorilla discourse that's been playing out on the internet for a week. Because if you haven't seen, there's just been endless debate about who would win in that fight. You even had NBC News bring a doctor on board to discuss who would win. And as all of this was playing out, you had MrBeast jumping into the mix to say, "Need 100 men to test this. Any volunteers?" Which one, for many, went from hilarious to a good idea once Elon Musk said he was down. And 2, seemed to trigger PETA, who replied, "100 men versus a gorilla? Maybe try 100 reasons to leave animals out of your content instead." With them then also tweeting out a fake MrBeast video saying, "Want to prove real strength, MrBeast? Ditch the gorilla fight and help retire bulls forced to haul tons of sugarcane in scorching heat by replacing them with tractors." Now, of course, with those, you had a lot of people kind of jumping on top of PETA, saying, "Calm down, it's just a meme." And this is funny enough, you had people saying PETA is just overlooking all the other philanthropic work that MrBeast is doing in the attempt to get some attention here. But really, getting back to the most important aspect of the story, who do you think would win? Because according to Tara Stoinski, the president and chief scientific officer at the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund, quote, "I think in terms of kind of being able to prolong a battle that could eventually wear a gorilla out and our ability to really cooperate and coordinate, I think those 2 elements kind of work against a gorilla's favor. So you have a gorilla that's fighting off people in the front, but you can have people attacking them from the back. They can take turns, so their endurance is going to be a lot longer than a single gorilla who might be fighting for hours. Though, hear me out, my counterpoint, what if all or a sizable percentage of the 100 people are cowards like me? Because I'm gonna be in the group huddle. I'm gonna be hearing out the plan, 99 others, we're gonna do this and that. And once the fight begins, I'm not doing that. I think ultimately, right, no weapons, it's just gonna come down to who those people are. That said, I'd love to know your thoughts. It's a fun little escape from the actual serious news of the day. But then some quick breaking news today. Mike Waltz is now out as National Security Advisor, but is nominated to be the ambassador to the United Nations. And so now Marco Rubio will be the National Security Advisor, and this in addition to him being the Secretary of State and the National Archivist. With all of this feeling less like a government and more like a dysfunctional group project, with many just wondering what the hell's going on, because you even had Fox News this morning reporting that sources said that Waltz was being ousted by Trump. Now, as far as what's next, it's unclear how long Rubio is going to be NSA for. It's not a Senate confirmed job, so he could in theory do it live forever. And this is potential replacements for Waltz or Steve Witkoff, who a source described as an idiot in an interview with the New York Post yesterday, as well as Rick Grinnell, who has so much bad blood with Germany that he was almost kicked out of the country as ambassador until he resigned from the post in 2020. Meanwhile, you also have Pete Hegseth, still employed, though you now have lawmakers calling for his firing amid leak after leak of his mishandling of classified material. And this news also means that we get to see Waltz get confirmed by the Senate. But then, next up in the news, let's talk about Trump cutting $1 billion in bipartisan school mental health grants, and experts are now saying that the move will result in more school shootings. You see, in response to the Uvalde shooting back in 2022, Biden signed a bipartisan bill that was passed by Congress that allocated $1 billion to grant programs aimed at helping schools hire and train more psychologists, counselors, therapists, and other mental health workers. But now you have the Education Department sending a notice to recipients informing them that the funding's been slashed, with them saying that a review found that grantees were violating the purpose of federal civil rights law and conflicted with the Trump administration's priorities. And specifically there, the administration's policy of prioritizing merit, fairness, and excellence in education, or in other words, this is all about DEI, with a spokesperson for the Education Department saying in a statement to Politico that the grants were intended to improve students' mental health, but, quote, instead, under the deeply flawed priorities of the Biden administration, grant recipients use the funding to implement race-based actions like recruiting quotas in ways that have nothing to do with mental health and could hurt the very students the grants are supposed to help. Though this, as you had other outlets reporting that the administration also opposed programs for educating mental health professionals about systemic racism and training therapists to focus on race-related stress and trauma, among other things. Now, notably here, the notice to grant recipients from the department did say that the agency, quote, plans to re-envision and recompete its mental health program funds to more effectively support students' behavioral health needs. But at least from the reports that we've seen so far, it doesn't appear to elaborate on how that's going to be achieved, which is why you had many experts and education leaders condemning this move. Like with Randy Weingarten, for example, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, who warned that school shootings will only multiply if students' mental health programs are cut, and adding, really, does this administration have to impose its ideological whims on everything, even apparently on bipartisan grants passed after the murder of students and educators in a school shooting? And that also echoed by gun control advocates like Emma Brown, the executive director of the Giffords Gun Violence Prevention Organization, who said, Republican leaders work side by side with Democrats to allocate these funds to save lives and stop school shootings, and now the administration is trampling that progress, and adding, this decision will cost American children their lives. But for now, we're just going to kind of have to wait to see if the Trump administration fills what has been described as this massive, dangerous hole that they have now created. And then I've got more news for you in just a minute. But first, if you're anything like me, you've had a business or a project idea that's just been chilling in your brain, half-baked and ignored for way too long. So, make this month the month that you finally take that side hustle or that passion project to the next level. For me, it was definitely my book club. I put it off forever. I was able to take the DeFranco book club from someday to launched in under an hour with today's sponsor, Squarespace. They make it crazy easy to build a site to start selling content, courses, physical or digital products, or whatever you have in mind. Also, you want to charge a one-time fee, offer a subscription, both done and done. They've got stunning templates that look like you hired a designer, and their Fluid Engine editor lets you drag, drop, customize, no coding, no stress, no excuses. Even my team uses Squarespace for our Daily Dip newsletter, where tens of thousands of you get your PDS fix in your inbox every day. News polls, giveaways, PDS show notes, all run through Squarespace. And Daily Dip issue 405 went out today, and your project vision is next. So hey, take the first step today with a free trial at squarespace.com/Phil, or scan that QR code and make today launch day. When it's ready to go, just use code Phil to get 10% off and let them know we sent you. Then, next up, we need to talk about how more American citizens are having run-ins with ICE, the surprising way the U.S. Postal Service is getting in on Donald Trump's mass deportation effort, and the White House's latest defeat in federal court. Starting with ICE allegedly raiding a home in Oklahoma, forcing the family outside in their underwear, and then confiscating most of their valuable possessions. Now with that, I will say, law enforcement, right, they did have a search warrant, but the problem is the names on the warrant, they didn't belong to anyone still living there. But a family from Maryland, all citizens, they had just started renting the house a couple of weeks earlier, with the mom speaking to local news and saying that she was inside with her 3 daughters when roughly 20 armed men busted through the door in the middle of the night last week.
I don't know who they were. They had guns. It was dark. All the lights were off. And I kept asking them, like, who are you? What are you doing here? What's happening? And they said, we have a warrant for the house. I did feel at times I was gonna die.
Now with that, the woman also said the men identified themselves as federal agents with the U.S. Marshals, the FBI, and ICE, and then said that the men ordered her and her daughters to go out into the pouring rain and barely gave them enough time to put on clothes.
They wanted me to change in front of all of them, in between all of them. I just couldn't understand, how is this happening to us? We just moved here from Maryland. We're citizens. That's what I kept saying, we're citizens.
That It allegedly didn't stop the agents from just tearing apart the inside of this house and actually taking what few belongings they had. We're talking phones, laptops, and their life savings in cash, with them claiming that it was needed as evidence. And this is, you had the woman saying the agents wouldn't even leave her a business card, meaning that she had no idea who to even contact